at the funeral of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.
Congrats on making it to Friday, the 43rd of May.
When you pretend they're not there, when you just assume those ride it out, they spread. Most people, as we noted, currently oppose defunding the police. That's where the polls stand right now. But will they feel that way in 3 months? How about in 3 weeks? In an environment like this, you don't know. Things move fast. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell once opposed mocking the American flag, kneeling to attack the country as racist. Now Goodell has announced he's with Black Lives Matter.
We, the National Football League, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier and encourage all to speak out and peacefully protest. We, the National Football League, believe Black Lives Matter. I personally protest with you.
So if this is so good for Republicans, explain this. Why does the latest round of national polls indicate that Joe Biden's lead in this race is growing? And that's not a small thing if you plan to live here, if you don't want to live under Attorney General Keith Ellison. So why is it happening? Maybe it's because Republicans in Washington have decided to sit this crisis out. They haven't bothered to explain what's wrong. They haven't bothered to tell us anything about what might be flawed about Black Lives Matter. And they don't plan to, by the way. They're too cynical. They're too fearful. They're going to pretend like it's not happening, repeat platitudes, read bumper stickers on the air, nod solemnly, and do nothing to protect the country. Why would voters reward that? Democrats, by contrast, who are completely wrong, and in fact are leading us down a path that won't end well, are not ashamed in the slightest of what they believe. Day in and day out, they brag about it. Just today, they kneeled in Washington in submission before Black Lives Matter.
We are here to honor George Floyd. For those who wish to, we will now kneel for our moment of silence.
Nancy Pelosi doing something crazy again. Before you comfort yourself with that thought, keep in mind it wasn't just Nancy Pelosi, not by a long shot. Members of the National Guard kneeled too. So did a group of FBI agents. So did the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, who just the other day was wearing blackface. Now he's with Black Lives Matter. The police chief of Webster, Massachusetts went even further than that. He lay on the ground before them in complete submission. And then things began to spin completely out of control, not just in this country, but throughout the West. As the crowd swelled and the demand for total ideological conformity grew louder, this latest cultural revolution became a parody of itself, as they always do. In London, protesters vandalized a statue of Abraham Lincoln, because what did Abraham Lincoln ever do for black people? In Boston, a mob defaced a monument to the first all-black volunteer regiment in the Civil War, because black people dying to end slavery sounds like white supremacy to us. And around the same time, a law professor from the University of Chicago called for an armed coup to overthrow the President of the United States, but that didn't get a lot of press because it didn't seem particularly newsworthy under the circumstances. It was that kind of weekend. What is going on? What is this about? Even the outlines are blurry at this point, but we know this. No matter what they tell you, it has very little to do with black lives, if only it did.
Those photographs, the president holding the Bible. And the president informed Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I would like to send troops into the cities to stop the protests. And Milley resisted and said, I'm not going to do that. That's for law enforcement. We're not going to send soldiers into the cities. And they got into a shouting match, as I'm told. They sort of fought it out. They yelled at each other. Somebody described the room as basically two bullies. And the president backed down. And, the meeting went on for a long time. They were in there for several hours. But at the end of the day, they didn't send the troops into the cities.
You know, what's striking to me is that for all what I glean from your reporting is as sort of scary and overwrought as the response has been, the men on the Lincoln Memorial, the protesters being cleared, that there was a version of this, that this was the tempered version that came out of Trump's impulses for something far, far worse and darker.
Well, I think that's pretty clear. I mean, those soldiers that we saw around the Lincoln Memorial and some of the other places, and I think the helicopter overhead as well, those were National Guard helicopters. And those are just, I mean, because it's the District of Columbia, those are under the president's command.
Right.
But no, he wanted to put, as I understand it, he wanted to put United States military troops in American cities across the United States. And that's what the discussion was about. And that's what Milley pushed back on. Now, what's kind of interesting here is that General Milley, as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is actually not in command of soldiers. He's he presides over, the chiefs of, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. But he doesn't actually command any troops himself. I'm not sure the president knows that, but basically Milley just said, forget it. We're not going there.
There's also this, the scene, obviously, outside the White House and Barr's decision to clear the protesters has become this very contentious scene. The president's obviously, we sort of heard that part of his desire to flood American cities with a show of force was reporting on him visiting the bunker. And it was just a somewhat comical accidental admission that happened apparently today. Trump had said that he was down there to inspect it in the afternoon. Barr today gave a totally different story. Take a listen.
It was a false report. I wasn't down. I went down during the day, and I was there for a tiny, little short period of time, and it was much more for an inspection.
Things were so bad that the Secret Service recommended the president go down to the bunker. We can't have that in our country. And so the decision was made. We had to move the perimeter 1 block.
Sounds like they did actually say that he had to go down the bunker.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know what was happening in there. I mean, at the end of the day, I ended up talking to Mark Meadows, President Trump's chief of staff, and he said, look, there were a lot of discussions, and they were all very nice, and they went on for hours and hours, but it's hard to know. Look, let me just make I think towards the end of my story, I tried to bring this up. I think the real question here is November and what's going to happen in November. And what if we have a close election that's contested? What happens then? What happens if the president refuses to leave the White House? And I tried to address some of that, but I think what happened on Monday is interesting because it's a bit of a dry run. And so it allows us to kind of talk about some of this stuff in case it happens again.
You mean a dry run in terms of a kind of stress test of various parts of the kind of institutional integrity of the nation should the president try to do something wildly in breaking with American democratic traditions?
Yes. I talked to a lot of generals last week, and they all said pretty much the same thing, which is like, look, if we have a contested election, probably the Supreme Court will get involved. Once they make the call, the whole machinery of the military will kind of turn towards the legally elected president, and there'll be no dispute. That's pretty convincing, but I think it's not the whole story. I mean, I think the one general that I spoke to said he was really concerned about the following scenario, which is, what if we have a close election, the outcome is in dispute, or it's really, really close, and the president refuses to leave, and he calls up, he calls one of the a governor in a conservative state, and he says, send the National Guard in, pick your state, right? Send the National Guard to Washington, surround the White House, and protect me. I'm not leaving. What happens then? And that's a really ugly scene.
It's a very ugly scene, and it's also sort of what happened here, because a lot of the troops that you saw were essentially contributed National Guardsmen from various states.
Yes, and so I think, when I listen to that scenario, in a way, the president has legal authority to do that. He certainly doesn't have the legal authority to stay in office longer than he may. But that scenario struck me as entirely plausible and pretty disturbing.
Yeah, disturbing to say the least. Dexter Filkins, a great reporter, and I'm always happy to be able to read what you are up to. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Coming up, we're seeing more of the country begin to reopen. But are we ready? Have we done enough?
For investment risks and information.
Noom is made for the 99.9999% of bank.
Have come here, they're pretty calm. They're around here. We hear the guy on a loudspeaker now, but they're almost lost. They don't know who to fight with. They're not yelling at anybody. They're just chanting and doing their thing. But right now, no police in the area and no confrontations. We'll see how it pans out. See if this building stands all night. Back to you.
All right, Dan, let me ask you quickly, though. It sounded like, was the police chief saying this is a temporary, not retreat, but evacuation of that building for some assessments, but that police do intend to go back to the precinct and reclaim it at some point?
Yes, they absolutely do intend to come back into this building eventually. I think this is a de-escalation move. They want to just kind of take the temperature down a bit, get away from the protesters, because every single night we've seen the same pattern where it's peaceful for a long time and then there's chaos late in the night. So they say if they just leave the building, they'll have these officers fanned out in different precincts. They have 5 in the city, now 4 that are operating. But I think the plan is to come back into this building eventually when things settle down. But you know, a lot of police officers are not happy about it. They say that this is total retreat from their duty, which is to police the area and protect the people in this city.
All right, Dan, keep us updated. Good to see you there tonight. Thank you. All right, a New York Times editor caves to the cancel culture mob and resigns over an op-ed by GOP Senator Tom Cotton. Fox News senior political analyst Rick Hume. He's got something to say about this. He joins us next.
Los Angeles or New York, but in Des Moines and Greenville, who are demanding change. And the idea that you would say that law enforcement itself, that has lost the trust of communities of color in particular, and that communities that are white are saying, we don't even believe you anymore. We think you got to change. We don't think you're accountable. We think you think you're above the law. That those are the people Jared Kushner is telling us should lead reform. Literally the fox in the hen house. So
Jonathan Karl
is out of touch, to say the least.
I'm sorry, Maya. Jonathan Karl, you cover Charlottesville in your book. You talk about this president on race in your book. We kind of have come to know this president on the topic of race. So let's just say that maybe there are folks in the West Wing who don't feel a national speech on the topic is a good idea. Are they, at a sheer political level, are they not, as some have said, on the wrong side of history? Are they now bumping up against demographics in a way that they've moved on and they could be fatal to a re-election campaign?
It sure feels that way, Brian. I mean, if you look at the West Wing, it's one of the least diverse workspaces in America. When the president made that walk across Lafayette Park to the front of St. John's Church, he went with a handful of his top advisors. Every single one of them was white. If you look at virtually any meeting there in the West Wing, unless it's one where he's brought in his Opportunity Zones group, it is almost entirely white. I wrote in Charlottesville. His campaign, his team back then, his advisors got him to give a national address, and he did it. It's been almost entirely forgotten to history because the next day he came out and made impromptu remarks about how there were very fine people on both sides of the protest in Charlottesville, very fine people marching hand in hand with white supremacists carrying tiki torches in Charlottesville. What I found out in reporting on that is they were so anxious to get him to talk to the country and give these prepared remarks that everybody quickly forgot about, that in the meeting leading up to it, the president met with some of his top advisors right there in the residence at the White House, and he went through the exact same rants, praising Confederate generals, Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee, talking about the fine people marching to keep their statues from coming down. And nobody, John Kelly was there, Jeff Sessions was there, Christopher Wray, who just became FBI director, was there. They all heard the president give this rant, and nobody pushed back at all. He went back and he read his prepared remarks they wanted him to read, and then the next day he said virtually exactly what he had said in private, and it became what was, I would argue, until 2020, probably the low point of the Trump presidency. All his advisors knew that's what he was saying. They knew that's where his head was at, and they did not try to talk him out of it.
And Phil Rucker, then we have just the visuals. We have the Attorney General happening to drop into conversation today that, yes, indeed, the president was in the bunker, that the president tried to pass off as the kind of routine bunker inspection one does. You have pictures of razor wire atop the new barricades outside the White House. You have protests on American streets every night for 14 nights. Those visuals start to add up.
They do, Brian, and what they tell is a story of a White House, of an administration trying to deceive the public about what happened. Last Monday night in Lafayette Square, I would add, by the way, to that visual, a documentary that our team at the Washington Post put together that shows minute by minute in that square the coordination among those federal law enforcement authorities about how they were going to go after the peaceful protesters and some of the weapons they used, and it completely contradicts the narrative that has come out of the White House, and it shows the degree to which they were trying to deceive the public. But beyond that, there's a picture here of an administration and the White House under siege, literally, with that barricade around the expanded White House security perimeter. My reporting shows that the White House staff are eager to get those fences down. They claim they don't have any credit for it. Nonetheless, it feeds this impression of the president militarizing what has become a social justice movement across this country, and using military force and the power of his office to try to hold back the calls for change from so many people in the street.
To our big three tonight, our thanks. We're always happy when Jonathan Karl takes a wrong turn on his way to ABC News, and to our friends Phil Rucker and Maya Wiley, thank you as always. Coming up here tonight, there's a lot of talk about breaking down the police, starting all over again.
Mental health, places, housing for the homeless, right? Substance abuse, harm reduction efforts, and all of this is effective in reducing crime. It's just time to take it to the next level. But defunding the police, maybe we can come up with a better term for it, because it's not necessarily talking about dismantling police departments.
Yeah, but that's what it sounds like. David, am I lying? That's what everyone thinks. Like, what? How are you going to get rid of the police? And I know.
And don't get me wrong. There are some people that do want to do that. That's going to take a long time if it's possible. It's going to take a while, and it may not be. But we need models. We need to try something different. Well, this current model of policing in the United States was never designed for people of color. It was never designed for the benefit of black people.
All right. Yes. So, David, listen. And I just said yes. I mean, that's all I can say. David, listen, jump in here, because you understand what I'm saying. And listen, I have friends who are part of the Black Lives Matter movement. They send me notes saying, Don, this is, because I said it's so nebulous. This is what defunding the police means. And then there's a whole, like, paragraph or two. And it's like, wait a minute. And if you can't put it on a bumper sticker, it's going to be hard to sell. I'm just being honest. Go on.
Bumper sticker is exactly it. Defund the police as a slogan fits on a bumper sticker. But what the average person hears is, get rid of the police or dismantle the police. Right. And then when you have the president of the Minneapolis City Council saying over the weekend that the council is committed to dismantling the police, that reinforces it. You set up a situation, and I agree with you and I agree with Neil, where on the side of people who want reform, you're raising expectations when you might not be able to deliver. And on the other side, you're setting up a situation where people resisting reform, up to and including the president, can easily demagogue the issue. when you actually get to hear, as you're saying, with activists, with politicians, what people plan to do, you have the council president on with Chris earlier tonight, and she was backpedaling off that because she was saying, look, no, we're going to do a year-long rethink. We're going to implement some deep reforms. We're going to bring all our stakeholders in. That doesn't fit on a bumper sticker.
It's too much. And I have someone, someone who I respect in, who is a lawmaker, says, Don, defund the police is the dumbest concept I've heard of. People want reform. They want to fix it. Police the police. But to suggest no one would show up when the police are called, that's crazy. And I won't say who that is, but I'm not saying that I agree with it. But that is a sentiment.
And I don't think that's what people are suggesting.
But Neil.
I know.
Listen, Neil, I'm not, listen, hang on, Neil. I'm not saying people should defund the police or not defund the police. But in this time when this president is so smart at messaging, are you sure you want your slogan to be defund the police and you want people to think that you want to dismantle police departments? I don't think so. So that's all I'm saying. Be smart and strategic about what you're doing and what you're saying before you go on this tangent that leads you down this rabbit hole that that can end up doing more harm than good for the cause that you actually want to help. Listen, even the former vice president said that he is not cool with this. He said he's, and President Trump is using this phrase to attack Biden, David. Is this going to help Joe Biden that he feels this way? Or if this actual defund the police thing, is that going to hurt him?
I don't know that the election is going to be decided on this, but you have the Vice President Biden, you have leaders in Congress on the Democratic side pushing back on defund the police for the reason that we've talked about. They've got this package that they introduced this week where they want to do things like get rid of qualified immunity, have a registry so that police who are fired can't go to other departments in other towns, have some anti-lynching provisions, etc. They may get some of it with Republicans, they may get none of it. But they're saying, look, if we want to have a meaningful debate, we at least need to go away from the cloud of a slogan that's easily demagogued.
So, as the person I just read, police the police may be, better. But anyway, who am I?
They can't police themselves. That's the key.
Well, that's the point, right? That's the whole thing.
That's the point.
Thank you both. I appreciate it. CDC says it is closely monitoring protests across the country.